Hi, my name is Brian, and I am here with Mr. Shazad. I wanted to thank Budweiser for letting us be here today to talk about our ale and IPA analysis. And what this analysis was about is to determine whether or not Budweiser should invest in the ale and IPA beer market. With our information, we do show that IPA and ale is a good investment for Budweiser, and the following slides are going to show which states Budweiser may have the best market penetration. But before we get into that, I'm going to first talk about the study. And the study was a K-value test, and what it did is it increased the accuracy of our model. In fact, it actually brought it up to 86%, which means that what the information we were able to give through our testing was above 75%. So you're going to have a pretty accurate test result. And start moving forward, we're going to talk about the top 10 states. And in these top 10 states, these are the ones that have the most amount of breweries in them and the percentage of how they are holistically through all of the 48 contiguous states. Colorado is one of the highest. And and when you see a slide later on, we'll be able to show you how exactly Colorado has such a saturated market, and we'll discuss that further. But first, we're going to talk about the bitterness and alcohol. And what we're going to show is here is the maximum for both. Which one has the most alcohol? Which one is the most bitter? And so what we found is that there are two breweries that have the highest alcohol and bitterness content. And those actually had levels from zero point 0.8 to zero point 0.10 with a pretty high level of bitterness, which we were actually surprised in our findings that the higher that you go in your bitterness, the higher the alcohol content. But we'll discuss that just a little bit later. The other thing was we have one that was the lowest, and that was 0.05, and that beer it was not very bitter, but it only had it surprisingly had quite a few ales and lagers that they promote. So it was really interesting to see for a lower company alcohol by volume that they were actually able to have quite a few beers out. The next thing that we have is the distribution of alcohol. And that we wanted to see where the best amount of alcohol should be within your ale and IPAs. And what we determined is 0.05 and zero point zero 0.08 was your best range. Most IPAs and ale beers fall within that range. We had some that had smaller volumes with higher alcohol content. We had a few that had a higher bitterness content, but the big range was between zero point zero 0.05, zero point zero 0.08, and it actually kind of had a right skewed slope showing that you have a definite increase as you get closer to the higher alcohol content. And as you can see here with zero point zero 0.05 being the highest, zero point zero 0.06 being a little bit lower but still higher, and it really doesn't really stop dropping till about zero point zero 0.08. So here's our comparison that I was talking about with alcohol and bitterness comparison. Basically, as your bitterness starts to move higher, the alcohol content moves higher. And we found that very interesting because what we found is that the highest density of beers was around zero point zero 0.05. Now, some were zero point zero 0.06, some were zero point zero 0.04, but it was still within that range, and the bitterness wasn't very high. What we did find is from 0.05 to 0.08, the bitterness did get higher, but there was a secondary density, and that's where we were talking about more of your market penetration holistically, and it will give you a broader range of your alcohol and bitterness content while you're testing your ales and your IPAs. So what we wanted to show next was the median alcohol and bitterness per state. The medium alcohol content, like I was saying before, is about 0.05. Some are a little bit lower, but This is kind of across the board through all 48 states. They actually have a range around 0.05. And then for the medium for bitterness, it's kind of up and down all over the place. But it looks like around 25 to 30 is really kind of where the average medium for all of the states to have a certain level of bitterness. So that gave us a, a little bit more information during our testing, and this is how we were able to determine the best beer penetration per region. So what we found is the West has the highest penetration of ale and IPA beers, and they actually have 44% of all of the ales and IPAs. The ale market that had the least penetration was the northeastern region. We'll see here in a little bit how, on another graph, how it goes from very high being in the west to very low. And what we believe is that it's the number of breweries and possibly the type of beer. We would have to make another study to further prove that, but right now it looks like it's all because of brewery. And the IPA market had the least penetration also in Northeast. The North Central and the South had nearly the same for their beers. They were kind of a median level. And when you see the next slide, you're going to see how we're going to talk about how the penetration is going to probably work for Budweiser the best. So here is the number of breweries by state. And what this means is from Colorado, you have a bunch of states that go from a very high number of breweries, with Colorado being 47, all the way down over here to DC area, your Wyoming area, where you actually have very few breweries. And what we were determining is that the higher the brewery distribution, the more saturated ales and IPAs are. And then on the other extreme of the lowest, where they had the most minimum, we don't know if it's due to laws and breweries being created or if it's just not a highly penetrated market. But we did believe that somewhere between the 30 range and the 10 range, which is kind of California, Texas, Oregon, Maine, Illinois, Florida, Ohio, that area, they have quite a few breweries, but they're not overly saturated. So uh, in our study, we found that staying probably with a smaller test sample between Colorado and California, maybe Michigan, might help let you test to see if your ale and IPAs are going to do well there. And then, of course, on the other side with DC and Wyoming, you'll see if maybe if your ale has a huge market there because there's not as many breweries. And then you could definitely use your range from 30 to 10 as a larger market test sample because they have quite a few. It's very popular, but it's not as dense and it's not as saturated. So in saying that, we believe that Budweiser has a very good role in having a market penetration for ale and IPAs, and we believe that they will do very well within this market. And now I'm going to come to kind of our conclusion on this. And basically, what we're saying is that if you want to do before, if you want to have a test sample to go out to the Northeast region, try a smaller sample, see if it works for you, then you might be able to move forward. If you're going towards the West region, you might want to have a smaller sample just because it's so saturated. You don't know if it's going to be able to be sellable because of all of the different brews that are available. And then, of course, the South and your North Central region really is going to have your best shot of having a market penetration because, like I said before, it's not as overly saturated, but it's also almost non-existent either. So it looks like you have a really good chance of having a lot of penetration there and being able to make a very good profit. So with this, if you don't have any questions, I would like to be able to conclude this. Have a nice day.